The number one thing you can do off the mat to improve your performance on the mat is going to be to get stronger, get more explosive, build muscle. All this stuff that we do in the gym has huge benefits for how we perform and ultimately how we protect ourselves or decrease our risk of injury on the mat. However, there are still some common mistakes that I see a lot of grappling athletes make that is holding them back from being able to feel and perform their best. And that first mistake that I'm going to talk about is chasing soreness over progression. Sometimes people get really fired up and really excited. They're like, man, I'm all about lifting heavy. I'm all about rolling hard. I'm going to go hit the gym, start lifting some heavy ass weights, start, pumping some iron and all that good stuff. Yet they're chasing the wrong metrics or they're chasing the wrong outcomes. And that's not to say that chasing getting sore is always a bad thing. However, it can come at the cost of you being able to get the most out of your jiu-jitsu training at the same time. And so one thing that I'm a big fan of is it's a quote by a powerlifter named Matt Winning, and I've also heard Stan Efferding talk about this too. They talk about your training sessions are designed or should be designed to stimulate, not annihilate. Now, what do we mean by that? We really want to have that workout, whether you're doing max effort squats, dynamic effort, upper body work, whether you're doing some jacked and tan training where you're just trying to build and pack on some muscle, or even if, say, you're doing some interval training, working on conditioning. All those training sessions should be designed to stimulate positive growth, to stimulate positive progress, but none of those training sessions should be so intense or so long or so difficult that it annihilates your body to where you can't have a good jiu-jitsu training session later that day or later in the week. And oftentimes it can be hard to know if you're making progress because, we do a workout, we get really sore, and there's this weird like pleasure in the pain of being sore. And I know I still feel that way. Like sometimes I'll have these conversations with my training partners where we'll ask each other like, what's your favorite body part to have just be completely obliterated and sore? And someone might say like, man, when my chest is super sore, that's the best feeling ever. I just know like I'm growing some big pecs. For me, it's my back. If my back is sore, like every time I puff my chest out and stretch and squeeze my back together, if that feels sore, I'm thinking like, man, like I just crushed that training session. And though soreness is a byproduct of hard training, soreness can be a side effect of a really, really good training session that shouldn't be the only thing that we're focusing on when we're going to the gym. It's almost like the idea of just getting sweaty. You can get sweaty. That doesn't mean that you're making positive progress. You can go to jiu-jitsu and you may think like, man, I just want to go in there and work up a sweat and get really good at jiu-jitsu. So you might get completely smashed. Like everybody passed your guard. Everybody crushed you and smother tapped you in mount. And you might leave the training session saying like, man, I did really good today. I'm super sweaty. When that's not really the case. Like, yeah, you got sweaty. That doesn't necessarily mean you had a productive jiu-jitsu training session. Soreness can also be kind of looked at the same way, where if you go to the gym with the only measure of whether or not that was a good training session is if you're sore the next day, okay, yeah, you're sore. You did enough work in the gym to create a lot of muscle damage and stimulate some need for recovery, but that doesn't mean you're making the most amount of progress possible. So some things that I like to look at when it comes to what is like the marker of a good training session is, for me personally, I like to make sure that I like to make sure that I leave the gym feeling better than when I walked in every time. And that's something that I picked up from a good friend and mentor, Mark Bell. He's often talked about how the gym should be something that always leaves you better than when you walked in. That doesn't mean that you feel like you have more energy or you should not be tired when you leave the gym. Sometimes that happens. Like you do some really hard conditioning intervals, you're going to be pretty winded afterwards, and that's okay. But you should always feel much better when you leave the gym than when you walk in. So if tonight I got some hard jiu-jitsu sparring and I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow morning. If I show up tomorrow morning and I'm feeling kind of tight and a little banged up from the sparring I did the previous night, when I leave the gym, I should feel better in the sense that I don't feel as tight. I don't feel as banged up. If I go into the gym already feeling tight and banged up and I decide, you know what, I'm just going to smash myself down even further. I'm going to do sets of 20 on back squats. I'm going to do some Tom Platt style drop sets on leg extensions and just completely obliterate myself. That's cool, but that may not be the best thing for me, especially if I'm trying to find the best balance of lifting heavy and rolling hard. So if you just follow that rule of, okay, when I go into the gym, I want to make sure I leave feeling better than when I walked in. The other thing that's important, at least for me when I go to the gym, is try not to ever miss lifts in the gym. I try as hard as possible to never miss a lift unless it's at the end of like a really, really long, maybe 6 months of training where I've been trying to build up towards a certain PR, and I'm going to send it and go for that big PR. Outside of that, I really try not to miss that many lifts. And sometimes my ego still gets the best of me and I miss some lifts. But the way I look at it is that you don't really make much progress off of the lifts that you miss or the lifts that you fail. So if you're doing it, max effort floor press, working up to a 3-rep max, say your all-time best is 225 for a triple. Not bad, especially if you're, under 180 pounds. And you hit 225 for a triple, and you're like, dang, that actually felt pretty easy. I just matched my old PR. I'm going to go for another PR. So say you throw 5 pounds on each side, you bump the weight up to 235. And it's tough, but you still get that 235-pound PR. You're like, dang, this is freaking awesome. Hit a 10-pound PR. I'm feeling great. Typically, when I see that happen in the gym with some of the athletes that I coach, I cut them off right there. I say like, hey, you just hit this win, take your PR, and move on. Like, this is a great stimulus for your body. You're stimulating great strength gains, and you crushed it. So, like, let's be happy with this and move on. And sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they say like, you know what, I think I got one more. So they add 5 more pounds on each side, they bump up to 245, and then they miss the lift. It doesn't always happen, but oftentimes it happens. And if they miss the lift, it's tough because it's like, man, I almost had it, or they're straining towards lockout, and then the weight comes back down, and then they fail the lift. And for me personally, not just from a psychological perspective, but also a physical and physiological perspective, I like to think that our bodies get the most benefit from all the lifts that we complete successfully. It's not always a good idea just to smash yourself into the ground and miss lifts all the time. Every once in a while, that's okay. Sometimes the training session calls for like really going up to an all-out max and going to complete failure. But for the most part, that's not really the case. Don't miss lifts in the gym. Leave every workout feeling better than when you went in. Now, this is kind of going off on a tangent here about training to failure. There are 3 types of training to failure. There is technical failure. So technical failure really is just the point at which you can no longer maintain proper form and technique. Sure, maybe you could lift the weight from A to B, but that doesn't mean that you're doing it well. And if you start to lose too much of that technical ability, you do kind of run into some risks or increasing your overall risk of injury. Now, the second type of training to failure is training to intentional failure. So intentional failure would be when you can no longer match the intention of that workout or of that exercise. And a perfect example is dynamic effort training. If you guys have watched my video on YouTube all about dynamic effort training, I break down all the benefits on why grapplers need that to be baked into their workout programs to help them build speed and explosive power. But one of the key components of dynamic effort training is moving fast and explosive and as violently and as aggressive as possible. So when you're doing, say, a speed bench press on a dynamic effort workout day, every single rep should be fast. Every single rep should look almost as fast as throwing a punch. That's how fast it should be. So even though if you added more and more weight and the bar gets heavier and heavier, even though you could still lift it totally fine, it's not like you're going to fail because it's too heavy. You're not moving it fast enough, and you have surpassed the point of intentional failure. So on one end of the spectrum, we have the point of failure where you can no longer perform the exercise or the rep with proper form and technique. That's hitting technical failure. Then we have intentional failure, where maybe you do have perfect form and technique, but it's just not matching the intention of what we're doing in the workout. And then the third and final type of training to failure is what most of us are familiar with, which is complete all-out muscular failure, where your muscles cannot contract hard enough, your nervous system cannot engage enough motor units and put enough juice into your body to complete that rep. Now, I'm a big fan of training to failure in every single workout, but only to technical failure and intentional failure. So with every workout, I'm trying to, flirt with the edge of meeting technical failure and flirt with the edge of meeting intentional failure. Very rarely will I go to the point of complete muscular failure, mainly because it just puts a huge toll on the body and it can be very difficult to recover from. And when we think about what we're looking for in these training sessions, we want to chase progress. We don't necessarily want to keep chasing soreness or just completely banging ourselves up for no good reason. We want to chase progress. And I found that you can still make tons and tons of progress by training up to the point of technical and intentional failure, and very rarely, and only on rare occasions, hitting complete muscular failure.